Greensboro, North Carolina Civil Rights Movement outcomes and decline. Social movement summary. These were peaceful protests that sought to fight segregation laws that were in place in Greensboro, specifically in department stores and lunch counters. Students from local colleges, specifically North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State, were the original four members who took place in the sit-in movement, which were peaceful protests at lunch counters, which only served white-only lunch counters. So the sit-ins began there at Woolworth, which was in downtown Greensboro, and began to spread all across North Carolina, and then began to spread across to neighboring states as well. So counter movements. The movement was unfortunately met with counter movements from the white community to law enforcement to political or politicians. So the sit-in protesters remained peaceful and nonviolent, which was in plan through their teaching and through their people they were influenced by to once they started this movement. You see here one of the original four members, Franklin McCain. He said, "We were convinced that only through nonviolence could we accomplish anything." And even though you see there in the picture, it's just very disgusting and unfortunate what these people had to deal with when they were just peacefully protesting for, equal rights. So there's several pictures of the events that took place when they began to peacefully protest there at the lunch counters. And even store owners began to shut down their stores. They claimed that it was for safety purposes. The men and women of all races began to unite to fight for this cause. They all began to peacefully protest in restaurants, lunch counters, and department stores all across the country. And they were influenced by the organizers who took initiation to begin the protests there in Greensboro. So nonviolent and peaceful protests were something that this group of organizers were heavily influenced by, and they truly believed in. The original four members were was organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC. They were heavily influenced by Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi. Both Dr. King and Gandhi were passionate about the importance of nonviolent protests and how it could be used as a successful tool in creating a positive social change, and something that they believed was that violence was not necessary to create this positive change. And this is something that has been heavily debated throughout different social movements, but definitely the SNCC, the original four core members of the sit-in movement that began to protest at Woolworth, they all stuck to their guns and they remained peaceful the whole time, even when they were faced with so much scrutiny and violence and just anything you can imagine. They remained peaceful, and as you see, the outcome, it was successful because they were able to create that positive change. So a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. here. He said, "Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon, which cuts without wounding and enables the man who wields it. It is a sword that heals." All right, movement outcomes in decline. So as you see there, a newspaper article 20 years later was trying to show or pay tribute to the sit-in movement and what they were able to achieve in the fight for equal rights of everybody within the United States during the Civil Rights Movement. It says here, "The movement was a success and had a positive impact on the fight for equal rights and desegregation. Desegregation laws were signed thanks in large part to the sacrifices made by all these protesters. Just like the Freedom Summer March that we went over in class, as well as all these sit-ins, the group of organizers, church and community members, political activists that were involved, they had to brief these people that they were going to face verbal assault as well as possible physical assault, and there was just a great deal of risk involved, but these people believed in something and they wanted to create that positive change no matter what, so they were willing to make a sacrifice. And they were able to do that with a positive social movement outcome. Desegregation laws began to be signed in Greensboro. The Woolworth lunch counter was desegregated, as well as practically every other restaurant and department store there in Greensboro. And then other neighboring cities and states, due to their protests that began to spread from the Greensboro protests, they all began to follow suit, and desegregation laws began to spread all throughout the country. And of course, one of the most powerful and important laws that were signed was the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which this particular movement had to play a great role in because the law made it illegal to discriminate on someone based on their race, color, or religion. This is something that the Greensboro Civil Rights Movement was directly seeking, to not be treated unfairly or unjustly based on skin color, race. And so something like that was extremely powerful and was caused a great impact. As you see later, 4 years later, from the sit-in movement, the Civil Rights Act was signed into law. So the outcome from this movement resulted in different social movements applying peaceful protesting tactics into their own protests because they saw that it was a successful tool in protesting and creating that change that they were looking for. So some more impact of the Greensboro protests and the movement outcomes. You see there's a lunch counter from Woolworth that is located in the Smithsonian Museum. So something like that is, it just goes to show the tremendous impact that these brave men and women showed there at those lunch counters. To have something like that at a museum for people to go visit and pay their respects and see what a great impact that had on the social movement. Through the political process model, protesters in Greensboro were able to work as a team to ultimately get the Woolworth lunch counter desegregated. These people were everything that we have learned in class, joined together to create that positive team to be successful in a social movement, such as college students, church members, civil rights organizations, community members. They all worked as a team. They encouraged others to protest, not just in their local community, but they encouraged that others in different cities and states do so as well, because they realized that that would have a greater impact on the overall outcome of the social movement. So in conclusion, desegregation was made possible due to the initiation shown by these Greensboro protests and their bravery in taking that initiation to do the first protest, and then so allowing others to follow suit and want to be involved. Community organizers used both internal and external resources to fight for political change and for courts to make these laws official through desegregation laws. So even though they faced counter-movement tactics, they stuck to their guns and they were strong and they were unified to protest and too strong for their counter-movements. So this resulted in a successful outcome of a social movement that's still used today.